Michelle, how do we define a breach? Is there a specific legal definition?
It's a great question. So a breach is going to depend on the law that is applicable. So you and I may use breach colloquially and say, okay, this is a breach because there was, someone was able to get into our systems. There was a breach of our systems. And so you can think of it, in that way. I prefer not to use that term. I usually use the term security incident because it's usually deemed an incident by the time I get involved. And unless and until I determine that personal data of specific individuals in specific jurisdictions are impacted, I don't classify as a data breach. And that's really important because there are implications once you learn that you have personal data that is regulated by either state or federal statute that is implicated, then you suddenly are on clocks for notifying regulators like state attorneys general or OCR or whoever it may be that you're providing notice to.
I'm imagining if someone hacked into your system, got past the digital moat and some of the digital walls that you're talking about, but never actually made it into the treasure troves of personal information, that would be an incident, but not a breach?
That's exactly right. And that happens all the time. In fact, I have companies that have thousands and thousands of incidents, but very, very few breaches. And that's important because you're never going to be able to have it be perfect. You're going to utilize subcontractors or vendors or software that has a problem that may have some sort of zero-day vulnerability or other vulnerability that you weren't aware of, and you're going to have incidents. But that's why you put other controls in place to prevent it from becoming a breach, which means you need to know what your important data is, whether it's information about consumers or investors or whoever, employee, personal data. You need to know that. You need to know what your crown jewels are and where they are located. If you have trade secrets or if you have trading algorithms or if you have things that you don't want anyone seeing, you want to protect it so that there's a bunch of different hurdles. And so like you said, you have your moat, you have your wall, you have a ton of different things. You want to make sure that if someone gets in over here, they're not able to traverse all the way to over here where we keep the crown jewels.
So I shouldn't have all my customer vendors, bank accounts, email accounts all as password 123?
No, please don't have password 123. I can tell you one of my least favorite breaches I had was one where the help desk issued the same password. So when someone would reset a password, they would do that, password 123. And ultimately when they had a breach, they were able to move so quickly through the network because they were able to access, everybody who called in, which was, at the time, it was like a third of the employees at one time or another had issued passwords and they just never reset. They didn't require a reset. The help desk was sending the wrong passwords in. And now, I would say most people are beyond that kind of poor cyber hygiene at this point in life. And frankly, most of the breaches that I've seen recently have been highly sophisticated. I'm telling you, you would never know that it was a threat actor that was doing what they were doing when they compromise information. So it's not that people are being sloppy or people are not being careful. It's that just as our technologies advance on the defense side, their technologies advance on the offensive side.
A couple more questions about what makes a breach a breach. Is there a significance threshold? Is it a breach if someone was able to just see, I don't know, how many customers you have or first names of customers?
For sure, that's a great question, and a complicated one. So the answer is it depends. It depends on what industry you're in. So if I just see, if I'm representing a hospital and I see a list of patients, that's protected health information. Now, could I, there's some things that you can do that assess risk of harm and they have the 4 factors test on the healthcare side that enable you to get out of a notification, but is it still considered, an incident that's ultimately a breach of protected health information? Yes, you may get out of having to provide a notification, but on for example, with investment advisors, you're subject to Gramm-Leach-Bliley if you're a federally regulated entity. And entities that are subject to Gramm-Leach-Bliley have a very broad definition of non-public personal information, NPI. And NPI includes just the association. So if I have, an investment fund and an investor, simply that information alone is protected NPI. Now, does that require notice? Most of the time, the answer to that question is no. And it's really if it sort of has that more sensitive personal information. But I'll note that, the SEC is considering and is likely to come out with some rules that are probably going to be a little bit broader than the state law definitions. And that is where we're going to see, I think, a lot of, concern and consideration that's going to need to go into the analytics of what data was truly impacted and does it require notice. One other thing that differentiates is if they just accessed it or if they exfiltrated, they took the data. So did I just see the data or did I actually take the data? There's some laws that say you have to take the data in order to have a notification obligation, and there's others that say if you had access to it alone, that's sufficient.
It may be, they had access to this folder. And realistically, during that 1 hour window, they wouldn't have been able to scroll through the quantity of documents in there. So then how do you treat the 100,000 page folder where someone had limited access to it?
That's exactly right. I mean, you'll see share drives that are accessed that have, terabyte of data, and they only accessed it for 5 minutes. So does that mean that everything is considered exfiltrated and noticed? My answer is it depends. Let me find out what's in there and what state you're in and what business you're in, and it may or may not be impactful.